The consumption of mummies, a macabre practice rooted in early modern European medicine, stands as one of the most bizarre chapters in the history of human remedies. This video delves into the origins, methods, and eventual decline of mummy consumption, aiming to provide a comprehensive and chilling account of how this practice evolved and why it ultimately vanished from the annals of medicine. The practice of consuming mummies can be traced back to the early modern period, where it gained traction primarily due to a mix of medicinal beliefs, cultural practices, and economic incentives. The belief in the medicinal properties of mummies was widespread among European physicians and their patients. The idea was not merely to eat any human flesh, but to consume specific types of mummies believed to possess potent healing powers. This practice was not limited to a small group of quack doctors. It was endorsed by reputable medical practitioners across Europe. One of the earliest records of mummy consumption comes from the writings of influential surgeons and physicians, such as Lanfranc of Milan and Pandolphus Colonusius in the 13th and 15th centuries respectively. They cited the use of human skulls and mummies in their medical treatments. Mummy was used in recipes to treat wounds, bleeding, congealed blood, and various types of fractured or dislocated bones. By the time of the Renaissance, these practices had become deeply entrenched in the medical traditions of Europe, driven by the belief that consuming human remains could cure a variety of ailments. Early modern physicians categorized mummies into 4 broad types, each believed to offer different medicinal benefits. The first type was mineral pitch, often mistaken for mummy due to its similar appearance. The second type was embalmed Egyptian corpses, which were the most prized, sourced from ancient Egyptian tombs. The third type consisted of recently deceased travelers whose bodies were preserved by natural desert conditions. The fourth type involved fresh corpses of executed felons, treated and dried, following specific Paracelsian methods. These methods were derived from the Swiss physician Paracelsus, who recommended using flesh from fresh corpses, specifically those who had died violent deaths, believing that such bodies retained vital spirits that could be harnessed for healing. The preparation of mummies for consumption was as elaborate as it was gruesome. Flesh taken from fresh corpses, often those of executed criminals, was treated with a variety of substances to preserve and enhance its supposed medicinal properties. The flesh was typically dried, ground into powder, and then mixed with other ingredients such as myrrh, aloe, and wine to create tinctures or pastes. In some recipes, the body parts were soaked in alcohol or distilled with spirit of salt. One particularly grisly method involved soaking human flesh in spirit of wine and setting it in horse dung for a month to extract a red tincture, referred to as the true elixir of mummy. Mummy consumption was not confined to a fringe group, but was widely practiced across Europe. Italy, France, Germany, and England were notable centres where mummies were used in medical treatments. The practice was particularly popular in Northern Europe, where powdered human skulls and mummy were widely used to treat fevers and poisons. The endorsement of mummy consumption by notable figures further entrenched the practice. For instance, Francis I of France was an avid user of mummy, and his interest in this macabre remedy was well documented. Germany was another significant importer of mummy and other human remains, with German medical authors like Jerome of Brunswick in the late 15th century frequently citing mummy in medical recipes. The Elizabethan surgeon John Hall mentioned the use of mummy in a book published in 1582, and British merchants like John Sanderson were involved in smuggling large quantities of mummy into England. Northern Europe, including countries like Sweden and Denmark, also saw widespread consumption of mummy among both university graduates and peasants. Judicial executions in these countries provided a source of human remains for medical use. Such endorsements helped normalize the practice among the elite and common people alike. The integration of mummies into medicine was facilitated by the overlap between spiritual and medicinal beliefs. Early modern Europeans, particularly Christians, managed to overcome the taboo against cannibalism partly due to their symbolic consumption of Christ's body and blood in the Eucharist. This religious context made the idea of consuming human remains more palatable. Moreover, the belief in the healing powers of human remains was supported by prominent medical figures. An intriguing and particularly gruesome aspect of this practice was the use of skull moss. This moss, which grew on human skulls, was harvested and ground into powder. Moise Charras, a 17th century French chemist, documented that powdered skull moss was widely used in Northern Europe, especially in Germany, for treating malignant fevers and epidemic diseases. The belief was that skull moss, having grown on the bones of the dead, contained potent medicinal properties. The medical applications of mummy consumption extended to treating specific ailments. For instance, in 1747, human blood, drunk recent and hot, was prescribed for epilepsy in England. Similarly, women suffering from prolapse of the womb around 1760 were advised to sprinkle a powder containing mummy, frankincense, and pomegranate flowers on the affected organ. The trade in mummies and other human remains was extensive and highly profitable. Alexandria, in particular, was a hub for the preparation and export of mummies. The trade involved not only genuine ancient mummies, but also counterfeit ones created to meet the high demand. This commercial activity helped normalize the practice and reduce its perceived strangeness or taboo. As mummy became a valuable commodity, it was increasingly seen as just another medical ingredient, comparable to other exotic substances like molasses or myrrh. The consumption of mummy was intertwined with spiritual and religious beliefs. The idea that the body contained vital, quasi-divine spirits made it seem logical to consume human remains to harness these life forces. It was thought that the human body, being the pinnacle of creation, contained powerful healing properties that could be harnessed through consumption. Interestingly, the consumption of human remains was not limited to Europe. Various tribes outside of Europe engaged in their own forms of ceremonial consumption. For example, some South American tribes, such as the Wari people, consumed the bodies of their deceased relatives to honor the dead and to help the living overcome their grief. They believed that eating the body would prevent them from longing for the deceased and reduce their sadness. In such ceremonies, simple utensils like thin splinters of wood were used to avoid direct contact with the flesh. This practice emphasized respect and minimized the ritual pollution associated with touching the deceased. The decline of mummy consumption began in the late 18th century and was largely complete by the early 19th century. Several factors contributed to this decline. The Enlightenment brought a new emphasis on reason, scientific inquiry, and skepticism towards traditional practices. This cultural shift led to a critical reassessment and eventual abandonment of corpse medicine. The rise of a more scientifically grounded and ethical medical profession aimed to distance itself from practices considered barbaric or outdated. Mummy consumption did not fit with the emerging standards of modern medicine. The late 18th and early 19th centuries saw significant changes in public attitudes toward hygiene and bodily cleanliness. Practices involving human remains began to be viewed as unhygienic and repulsive, contributing to their decline. The evolving religious and ethical views increasingly saw the consumption of human remains as a violation of human dignity. The idea of cannibalism, even in a medicinal context, clashed with the emerging moral standards of the time. Modern advancements in medical science provided alternative treatments and a better understanding of disease and health. These scientific developments reduced the reliance on and belief in the efficacy of corpse medicine. Today, the historical practice of consuming mummies is viewed with a mixture of fascination and horror. Modern science rejects the efficacy of such practices and highlights their basis in outdated medical beliefs and superstitions. The ethical implications of consuming human remains are significant, and the practice is seen as a violation of human dignity and respect for the deceased. Anthropologists and historians study the practice to understand the cultural and medical contexts that made it possible. They examine historical texts, medical recipes, trade records, and archaeological findings to piece together the story of mummy consumption. These studies offer a glimpse into a past where the boundaries between medicine, magic, and superstition were often blurred. The history of mummy consumption is a dark and chilling chapter in the annals of medicine. It reflects the lengths to which early modern Europeans went in their quest for healing, driven by a mix of scientific curiosity, economic incentives, and cultural beliefs. The eventual decline of this practice underscores the profound shifts in medical science, ethics, and public attitudes that paved the way for modern medicine.